I couldn't even forgive myself for a lot of things, so how could God forgive me if I can't even forgive myself? Part of what I hope to do someday, God willing, I am a deacon. I can help them see that because I've lived it. I've lived the annulment process. I've lived the conversion process. I want to share my experiences now with them. So if one person says, hey, that's me too. If he can do it, I can do it. Then that's what matters. Sometimes when you go through that process, it's like picking the scab off a wound, and all the pain comes back up. And it was a very tough time. If it takes a little bit of pain to get there, as hard as that was, it was worth it. I think we'd both say we'd go through anything for that.
What do you think you would have done if the annulment couldn't be granted? Welcome to Planted Cross. I'm Madeline Hines. Today we sit down with Neal Reeves, a nursing professor and a diaconate candidate. We discuss his conversion to Catholicism, his annulment process, and his journey with spiritual direction and the diaconate process. I enjoyed discussing the importance of Catholic marriage and how we can use that vocation to make each other saints. Planted Cross exists to bring you stories like this. If you have a story that you want to share or know someone with an amazing story of faith, please consider reaching out to us on Instagram to be a featured guest. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe, share with a friend, and go to our website, plantedcross.com, for more life-changing stories. Neal, welcome to Planted Cross.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
We're very excited to have you. You're an early supporter of Planted Cross, and you reached out to us very early on, and we were really happy to have you on.
Well, like I said, thanks for being here. Katie and I obviously have a connection, and when I saw her face, I was like, ooh, what is this? Let me check this out.
So you discovered it organically?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really great. Did it just pop up on your YouTube feed?
I think what it was, she shared it on Facebook. I'm like, what is this? And so I kind of followed the trail back to what the YouTube page from there.
Yeah, that's really great. That's exactly what we wanted it to be. We want people in the Little Rock Diocese especially to reach out to us and want to be featured. We have a list of people that we're trying to reach out to right now, but if there's people that want to be on the show, we want them to reach out to us and ask us. And we also have the articles that we write online. So if someone doesn't want to be on camera, they can just have a written interview. But yeah, we're really glad to have you. Could you introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, my name is Neal Reeves. I'm a parishioner at Christ the King here in Little Rock. My wife and I have been attending there, I think, since 2010. So yeah, we've been around here. I'm a convert. I converted back in 2002 over at IC in North Little Rock. And so, yeah, we have 5 kids now. We're up to 12 grandkids. Number 13 will be here in, I think it's February. So growing big Catholic family.
That's really great. Could you share your background and your story with us?
Yeah, so I grew up in Arkansas. I was born in Hot Springs, and my family moved to Little Rock as a fairly early age. And so we kind of grew up in Southwest Little Rock, and we moved to North Little Rock. My parents moved my sister and I there in I think I was 12. I don't remember the year, but I was around 12 years old. And so we kind of grew up in North Little Rock. I've made some great friends during that time period. That a lot of my friends were Catholic. We were not. We weren't a real religious family. My parents didn't really go to church. They talked a lot about God, but did not attend. But they were very concerned that we went. So it was always kind of funny. On Sundays, there would be this little brown school bus, and I think ours was Snoopy. He'd come by the house, and we'd go running out and get on the bus and go to the local Baptist. Actually, it was Archview Baptist Church that's still standing over there. So we'd go to church there every Sunday, and then same thing when it'd be Vacation Bible School. They'd come around and pick us up. So they were very concerned about us going to church, and we talked a lot about God. But other than that, wasn't real religious, and just kind of grew up that way. And then when we were in North Little Rock, like I said, I had a lot of friends that were Catholic, and I was always interested because it was so different than what I grew up with. So I'd go to Mass, like the big Masses. Like I loved going to, midnight Mass at Christmas or New Year's Eve. And those were always so cool to me because it's like, wow, look at everything that's going on. I didn't understand, but it was always real fascinating to me to be around that. And I, had the opportunity through them to kind of be around Father Tribou a little bit and just see the impact that man made on so many men's lives here in Little Rock. And it made me hungry for that at a very early age, because they had this connectedness. And if you look at, and same thing at Mount St. Mary's, you look at any of these kids that go through there and the community they create, it makes people want to be a part of that. And so I was always drawn to it, but never knew what to do or how to do, and so didn't for a long time, because I grew up Protestant, that was easy. And so I kept doing that for a very, very long time, until that time I had to do something different. Just as I shared before, I remember sitting in a church on Sunday, and I'm a music person. Music touches my soul, and I always get drawn in by good music at a service. And some of they got drums, they got electric guitars. It's exciting, right? And I just remember that joy being gone, and I was like, I just can't do that anymore. And that's kind of what led me in my own conversion to seek out, okay, it's time. Let me see what this is all about. And got introduced to a wonderful man that got me started, Deacon Ron Stagger. And that's kind of the rest is history. That's kind of what took me off on my journey into Catholicism.
Mm-hmm. So you grew up at a Protestant church, basically by yourself with your siblings?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's just my sister and I. And then even as an adult, I just going to those Protestant churches. And there were a time that my sister and her family, we all went to the same church. But yeah, that's pretty much how it was. And I don't ever remember stepping foot in a church with my parents unless it was a funeral. And I think as a young adult, I remember coming home I was in the military, so I'd come home, and it meant a lot to my dad to go to church with him because he started going frequently. So when I would come home, I'd go with him. But I was an adult before I ever remember that being a thing in my life.
Making it a priority?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Was your mom on board too when your dad started going back to church?
She comes to it. Well, she always said that her family was Church of Christ, and I'd never been to a Church of Christ church. So I'm like, is that true? I don't know. But she says it's true, and I remember my grandmother saying that, my great grandmother saying that, but I'd never stepped foot in one. But she never really, like I said, she believed in God and she talked about God, but that was never really a priority for her, unfortunately, and never really was up until the time she passed. So,
was that kind of the relationship that you had with God at the time as well? Was just kind of like, church is important, I should go, but how was your relationship with God at the time?
Yeah, church. So yeah, it was a part of I'll say my routine of life, right? The relationship wasn't really there, if that makes sense. I knew who God was, and I think you go through periods of time where you think, oh, God's not listening, or God's too busy, I'm not going to worry him with that. And so it was very superficial. Of course, in times of trouble, what is the first thing you do? You seek God's face. But it wasn't a committed relationship, and it was on my part.
So you went to a Baptist church. Was there a point where you decided to be baptized?
Actually, when I came into the Catholic Church is when I was baptized in 2002. Really? Yeah.
So you didn't get baptized as a Protestant?
I did not.
Is there a reason why?
I don't know. That's a good question. I never made it a priority, and I think it was probably because I just didn't really have that relationship and didn't really understand the true need for it, because I didn't cultivate that relationship. And so once I cultivated that relationship, I wanted that more than anything. So that really kind of transpired as I converted to Catholicism.
And when you would go to the Easter Vigil Mass or the Christmas Eve Mass with your friend growing up, was that more of like a sleepover and you were just hanging out with your friend and he's like, come on, my parents are making me go? Or is it something that you were like, hey, I want to go with you if your family's going?
Yeah, initially it's like, hey, my parents are making me do this, please go with me. I was like, okay. That's how it started. And like I said, my best friend growing up went to Catholic high, so he was exposed to all this all the time. But as I got in and started, hey, what does this mean? He was like, I don't know. His mom would say, oh, it's this. You know, she would kind of explain things to me. And so that's really kind of what started as, yeah, I'll go be your friend and go with you, to like, now I want to go be a part of that. And I can even remember at an early age, when John Paul was named Pope, I remember sitting in my living room watching him come out and thinking, wow, that's so cool. And that's so powerful. And someday I would love to go there. Of course, being a kid from Arkansas, I was like, how am I ever going to the Vatican? How am I ever going to see this? And then, you know, later in life, I was actually able to be in Vatican Square. I was actually able to hear John Paul speak from his residence. And so it was a kind of a full circle moment of being that little kid watching it on a little 13-inch TV, you know, halfway across the living room, thinking, oh my gosh, one day I want to be there. And then to actually stand there and hear it in person was just amazing.
What started you taking your faith more seriously and getting into more of a deeper relationship with God?
So probably what really got it going, it was in the late 80s, early 90s. I was stationed in Southern California in the Navy, and our chaplain on our ship was a Catholic priest. And he was so good about just sitting down and striking up a conversation about just anything. And I always found it kind of really cool that he was just an average dude. Just sit down and have a conversation with you about anything in the world. But he's this Catholic priest. And my mind, what I thought of Catholic priest is what I remember younger going to Mass here in Little Rock. And what my image was and who he was were two totally different people. And he probably is the first one that really put the bug in my ear of, I probably need to take this more seriously. Now, I still didn't go through the process of converting to Catholicism at that time because I was still, Protestantism was very comfortable, and that's where I felt comfortable. So it did encourage me to at least find a church and start going to church there in California and trying to live a little, I don't want to say a better life, but a better relationship, a better committed life to God. So it was through him and his conversation. So that's kind of what really made me think, okay, I need to make this a priority and take it a little more seriously.
Mm-hmm. When did you end up meeting your wife?
So Robin and I met through a friend later in life. Had a buddy that was in, so it's kind of weird. I was in the Navy, I left, I came home and joined the Army. So I was in the Army. Army buddy of mine called me one day. He said, hey, I've got this friend I want you to meet. You interested? And I said, not really. And what I didn't know, she worked with him, and he's on the other side. Hey, I got this friend you want to meet. And she's like, eh. And so we were very like, I don't know about this. And I put him off for months and months and months. And he called me, just really giving me, dude, just meet her. I said, all right, I'm going to meet her. But you've not painted, he painted this picture that I had this wild, crazy image in my head. I said, but if this is as bad as I think it is, I'm coming to find you. And so I called her one day, and we talked a few times. We went out on a date, and I was like, okay, she's not crazy, because in my head I had her made out to be crazy. And she probably thought the same of me, knowing our friend. And, you know, as we got to know each other a little better, and one of the common things when I met her, I'd already converted, because we met in 2010. She was cradle Catholic, and that was like kind of might be more than what I think it is, even though my older kids, I always told them, I said, if I ever say I want to get married again, please come check on me, because I'm probably not well, because I've made up my mind that this life that I'm going to live the rest of my life is going to be to be with my kids, to better commit myself to God, and just, you know, be a happy man with that. And then she shows up. And so it just kind of blossomed from there. And, you know, she had a daughter that was 17 at the time, and it just kind of all clicked. And it was almost like magic. And think it caught both of us. Well, I'll speak for me. It caught me by surprise because I was not prepared for that and was not looking for that. And a good friend of mine told me, when you're not looking and you're not prepared, the right person comes along. And she's a rock star.
So you were married before?
I was, yeah, yeah. And I think that part of it was probably what, when you go through a relationship, a marriage, and have kids and it fails, you feel like a failure. You feel like people are disappointed in you. You feel like God's disappointed in you. And I think that probably slowed some of my growth in my spiritual life because I was living with that guilt because I couldn't forgive myself. And anyone that goes through that knows there's always two pieces of that puzzle, and there's guilt that goes both ways. And I struggled with forgiving myself for that. And so that made it tough.
Were you Catholic during that marriage?
At the end of it, yes. And I think part of it was, well, I don't want to speak for her, but I say for me, what I think part of it was that I did convert to Catholicism. I think that was a very difficult thing for her. And I didn't understand it and didn't really want to understand why it was difficult for her. And I probably took what was said to me a little too literal. I know what was meant, but when he said, don't let anyone or anything interfere with your relationship with God, that comes first. And I probably took it too literal and was not willing to listen or not willing to understand the other person's thoughts or feelings about it.
How old were your kids when you converted?
The youngest, I think he was, well, it was 2002. He was, I don't know, 5 or 6. And the oldest would have been probably 14-ish. I think she would have been somewhere in that range, yeah.
Would you take them to church with you when you went?
They would go some, and they were like, "It's so weird, Dad." I'm like, "You just don't understand it." And funny thing is, my oldest daughter, she's now Catholic. Her husband was a cradle Catholic, and when they met, so she converted herself. And so it's just, my oldest daughter's the one that is, but the rest of them are not. I think they still think it's a little weird because they don't understand the Mass. So, but they have come, and they do ask questions, but not so far as to go through the process to really dig in and see what it's all about yet.
When you were still Protestant, did you go to church together as a family? Did they grow up Protestant?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. And they pretty much every Sunday we were there, and they were very involved in the youth in the church. Whatever was going on, they were involved. They go on winter ski trips with the group. They would go, so they were very involved. Yeah, for sure.
And I guess also like the 14-year-old, like she probably had her group at church that she really liked, and you're like, hey, go to this other church that looks more boring to you.
Well, and sometimes I say, oh, the music is boring, the church is boring. And again, I can see that from their age, because sometimes I look over at my grandkids when we're at Mass, and you can see them looking up, and it's like, you can tell they're not really there, you know what I mean? But the important part is that they're there. And because sometimes after Mass, like we'll go have lunch with them, and I'll say, "Oh, what do you think about what do you think about what Father said?" And just to see what they're listening, and it's surprisingly they can explain and they understand. Especially the young one, he's 7 now, and I think half the time he's over there thinking about what he's going to do after Mass, but he's listening because he can explain it. So it's always kind of cool to see and hear that.
So you were kind of on your own when you were converting.
Mm-hmm.
Was it more of just an individual process? Mm-hmm. Did you have people guiding you through that conversion?
The group, the RCIA group, yeah. And actually my wife at the time, her friend, who was kind of my sponsor through it, she's Catholic, obviously. And so it was kind of odd and a weird situation. So she's trying to help me through the process, but still remain friends with her friend, right? And so there were some along the way, doing what they felt like they could do. I think the person that I felt helped me the most was Bishop Malone, because he would take my harsh questions sometimes and just be very even keel and allow me to almost be pushed back against him and just still be loving in his answer. And it sounds kind of crazy in some way that kind of irritated me. It's like, I want you to be angry back with me because, you're challenging me and I want to challenge you back. And he just was always very loving. And I think that allowed me to let my guard down and start to see the things that I needed to see along the way.
And he was your parish pastor?
He was our parish pastor at the time, yeah. And ironically, the associate pastor at that time, he's now my spiritual director, so it kind of has come full circle, so.
And when you had those tough questions, were they about Christianity in general? Because did you identify as a Protestant even though you hadn't been baptized yet? Because that's very important as Protestants usually. Like the process is heavily emphasized of baptism, especially at a Baptist church.
Yeah.
Or if your mom grew up Church of Christ, there's always the altar calls at every service.
Yeah, I consider myself a Christian, although it was almost like, but I'm not fully bought into it, if that makes sense. I'm still searching. Always wondering, okay, what does God have for me? What is this all about? And it was a constant struggle. And maybe because the formation in my younger years was not super solid. There wasn't someone that I could go to with those tough questions. We had our parents and we could ask those questions, but they were usually superficial answers because they didn't have the depth either. And so a lot of it was almost a little bit of anger because I wish I'd known more and I didn't. And it's not anyone else's fault but my own, but I didn't know how to go about that. And it was a very difficult time trying to figure it out and not really feeling comfortable to let someone know that I didn't know something or didn't understand something.
What were the toughest questions that you had about Christianity specifically?
Probably the common ones that people have. If God is so omnipotent and loving, why is there so much drama and hurt in the world? Why are, those sort of things I really struggled with. How does, for example, a bad person that maybe murdered someone can be forgiven and go to heaven? Those things I really struggled with. I didn't understand God's love. I understood God's love in human terms and didn't understand the whole idea of forgiveness per se. Because, like I said, I couldn't even forgive myself for a lot of things. So how could God forgive me if I can't even forgive myself? Those were the struggles.
So you identified as Christian, though, and not as agnostic or anything like that?
No, I believed that there was a God out there. I just didn't know how to know him or to reach him or to really communicate with him on a deep level.
What was it that made you want to ask the Catholic Church those questions and maybe not the local church that you were going to, the Protestant church?
I think what I saw in the local Protestant church was there was a lot of conversation about forgiveness, but you could see there was not a lot of forgiveness in the community when something happened. And so it kind of really bought into my own thoughts. It's like, okay, this idea of forgiveness is kind of really shallow. And I think I started thinking about my friends growing up in the things that I saw of the Catholics that I were around or the Catholic priest that I was around. And it just made me think of those individuals and how real, especially that Catholic priest, I wish I could remember his name, but I cannot, just how real and genuine he was and how understanding of my doubts and things he was. And, you at that point in time, I think I felt a little bit of hopelessness. And I knew I needed something. I just didn't know what that something was. And I'm like, what can it hurt to talk to someone to see what answers come of that? And to get that first couple of conversations, and one of the first books he gave me to read was Scott Hahn's Rome Sweet Home. And that was pretty life-changing. I mean, here was this Protestant pastor that really kind of ostracized the Catholic Church that is now in the Catholic Church. And I was like, I couldn't wrap my head around that, but I wanted to know more. And that really got the inquisitiveness in me going.
So the Catholic Church was kind of like a last resort. Like, I don't know where else to go. Maybe they'll have the answers.
Yeah, you know, when you get, it was desperation, right? I'm desperate. I need something. This life is not fulfilling. Like you just felt that desperation. I needed something tangible to hold on to, whatever that was. I didn't know what that was, but that's what I was looking for.
And what do you think the thing was that made you not only think, okay, yes, I do believe and love this God and that this God loves me, but also that I also need to follow him into the Catholic Church? Well, what was the thing that tipped it over for you?
So what really got me was we were talking about the Eucharist, and I was so struggling with that idea because it was so foreign to me. It's like, wait, that's a little wafer. In my mind, that's why it's a little wafer. That's not what you say it is. And I just remember us talking and reading through John chapter 6. And again, I remember thinking, oh, that's what the Catholic Bible says. I'm reading it out of the Catholic Bible. I can see it says that, but I didn't have my Protestant Bible. And I'm like, I know that says something different. And then when I got home and I read it and it said the same exact thing, I was really kind of thrown for a loop of why have I never heard this before? I mean, it's been right there in that Bible I had, but I'd never heard it before. I'd never heard one sermon preached on it in my lifetime. And so it was like, and I didn't really understand the viewpoint of the first century Jew at that point, but I could read the words and understand that what he's saying, the people around him were shocked and said it was very hard to understand that, and they walked away from Jesus. And I'm like, now that I see that, I couldn't unsee anything else, and that was the tipping point for me. And then my almost angry type questions went to very inquisitive. I want to know more. I need more. And that really was the tipping point where it was, I'm not just here to get answers. I'm here to join the church. That changed it.
What specifically about it changed it for you and hit home?
Just how cutting the words were for me. This is my body, this is my blood. Those are very cutting words, even to this day when I hear them. And to read the doubt in other people that they couldn't stand it and had to walk away from it. To this day, it just kind of gives me chills to think about. And you know, I think now I didn't know him then or hadn't heard this then, but now I think of what Bishop Barron says. If everyone likes what you say, you're probably not being very truthful. So sometimes being very truthful, you're going to make some people angry and make them walk away, but it's what they need to hear. And that's what I needed to hear. And instead of walking away, I wanted to keep walking towards that, because that told me, I think this is what I'm looking for.
Do you think it was the fact that he was very sure about it, that it was a sacrifice of himself, and that not only was he saying in that moment, like, this is true, but also, like, he's showing his love for you in that he would be like have that self-sacrificial love, yeah. and that kind of confirmed both of those things for you?
It did. And it's like, for the first time, you know, you always heard about this unconditional love or this agape love, and I didn't understand it. And that was my first, yeah, your parents love you that way, but outside of that, I didn't understand it. I didn't believe in it, per se. But that piece showed me that this does exist, and it's here for you to take and be a part of if you want to.
And you had a very hard heart at the time.
Very hard heart. Very hard heart, yeah.
And it softened.
It softened. It wasn't where it needed to be yet, but it definitely softened. It opened the door for me to let down my guard. And now, instead of trying to find the contradiction in everything, to really just listen and analyze what I'm hearing. I'm very analytical, so I need to analyze things. And so it opened the door for me to listen and not immediately think of my response.
So what was the process like leading up to the day that you were entering into the church? And you received, I guess, all the
I
sacraments
did.
just at one time?
At one time. You know, it was actually a little tough because, you know, there were some issues to get straightened out. And so I wasn't able to come in right at Easter. You know, I think they were a little concerned with that. My wife at the time, she was not real happy about it. And so they were trying to be, I think, very cautious of that as well. And so it was actually in September of 2002 when I actually came into the church, and it was just kind of a small, quiet, you know, at the time, my wife, my sponsor, and her husband, and the priest. And so I got to receive all the sacraments there at once.
How long were you in the process of asking questions and investigating before that moment?
You know, if I'm being honest, I think for many, many years in my own heart, but at least probably a couple of years out loud, trying to, you know, figure it out, if you will. But as I kind of reflected over the last week or so, it's probably been many, many years that I, you know, we're going through that.
So it was a very slow conversion process of God slowly opening up your heart.
Yes, because it sounds crazy, but I'm kind of a perfectionist, and I don't like to make mistakes. And, you know, that was one of the things I was worried about. Am I making a mistake? Am I making this out to be something that it's not? And so I was very cautious about that. And I think that really kind of slowed the process.
I mean, that makes sense when most of the people in your personal life were not Catholic and were not maybe supportive of it.
Yeah.
And so I could see why you had those questions and those doubts as well.
Yeah, even my own parents are like, "Why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "But you didn't even take us to church, so I don't understand the questions." And so, but you know, your parents are your parents. You never want to disappoint your parents. So yeah, it was a slow burn. It definitely was.
So what did the first couple of years look like once you came into the church?
You know, it was kind of crazy. So, like I said, I entered the Catholic Church in September 2002, and then, you know, that was 9/11 happened right after that, and I was in the Army at the time, in the reserves, and we got deployed. So, March of 2003, I'm out the door going to, we didn't know exactly where, but we had heard Germany, and that's where we ended up, was in Germany. And so, as tough as that was, it was actually probably a great thing. We had this beautiful little priest that had this little parish on the base, that he was just, man, he had a big heart, and it reminded me of that chaplain we had in the Navy. They were so similar, and just an everyday guy, and so he understood that I was really new to the faith. And he was just very patient with me, and, you know, continued to answer my questions as they came up. But it was also really cool is in that same year when we had a long weekend, a couple of my friends were Catholic. He said, "Hey, we're going to Rome. You want to go with us?" I'm like, yeah. I said, "We're going to the Vatican, right?" And I'm like, "Dude, we're Catholic. Of course we're going to the Vatican." So it was really kind of cool to be able to go do that. You know, that little kid that said, "Golly, someday I want to be there." And now all of a sudden I'm standing in the middle of it. And so it was a very humbling experience, especially knowing that that's John Paul. That's the same Pope I saw come out on that balcony when I was a kid. And here he is in the window speaking to us. I don't know what he's saying. Obviously, he's speaking in Italian, but it was just real surreal to be there and be a part of that, and take in the Catholic faith in Europe and see all the beautiful churches and just see it from a different light than what I've seen here in Little Rock.
How did that impact you, being in Europe and seeing a place that has a deeper Catholic history than what we see in the United States?
Yeah, it's pretty impactful when you realize, I mean, it's the church has been here 2,000 plus years, but now you're standing in some of these places that's been there a long time, the Vatican being the great example. It shows the enormity of the faith. For me, it did. And it, as I watched other individuals, say locals, if you will, it's like, they grew up with this, and I don't know that they appreciate the way I do just how awesome this is or how special this is. Because, if you see something every day, it kind of loses its star power, if you will. And it's just, it allowed me to grow and really appreciate the faith at a deeper level.
So how did that time period look between the early 2000s up until 2010 when you met your wife?
Like I said, I had no desire to be married again. I just didn't want to go through that. And she would admit this too. She kind of fell away from her Catholic faith a little bit and tried some Protestant churches, but it just didn't really sit well with her, and probably was not participating like she needed to in her own faith. And as we came together and as we grew closer, it became an important part of our dating life. It's like, okay, we're going to Mass together every Sunday. And so we started doing that. And, we just kind of grew together that way. Her coming back into the church and, me being the inquisitive person that I am. She always says, I feel like you know more about my faith than I do. And I've been this my whole life. And, and we were kind of talking about it, that sometimes when you grow up Catholic, you just kind of take some things for granted and don't really dig in deeper. And so through my digging in deeper, she said, she'll tell you that she's learned a lot of things about her own faith that's been a part of her life, her whole life. So we've kind of grown together that way. Yeah.
Yeah. What did her family life look like with growing up in the Catholic faith? Were they devout Catholics? Were they very deep into it? Or is it a little bit more like, well, we go to Mass on Sundays and we're Catholic? Yeah,
I think it was more of, we go to Mass on Sundays. Her mom and her sisters, they all went to Mass. Her and her sisters all went to Mount St. Mary's. And her dad he wasn't Catholic, and he didn't go to Mass with them. So there was a little bit of that disconnect as a family unit, I think, of what Mass means and their faith. But they were definitely exposed to it.
Was she strong in her faith the time you met, or was it meeting you that made her feel stronger about it?
I think she believed what she believed. I don't know that she would say she was strong in it because she wasn't participating in it on a regular basis. And I think us coming together and learning each other and learning what was important to one another, I think that kind of brought her back and wanted her to grow deeper, just like I wanted to grow deeper. And I think that she would probably say that, that's something that she missed in her own adult life too, is having someone to share that with. And because she didn't really have that in her formative years either.
And did you guys have to go through the same type of marriage prep that young kids in their early 20s do as well?
No, we were not very good Catholics. We didn't want to wait, so we got married. And then we decided, we have to make this right. Or she said, I want our marriage to be blessed by the church. So we went through and got our marriage convalidated and went through that process. And she's the one that actually I was like, we're married, I'm fine, we're good. But it was an important thing to her, and then when I saw how important it was to her, it became important to me too.
So why was it important to her that you guys went through the convalidation? What was the draw for her that was, this is really important? I
think as we were growing together in our faith together, it was she wanted to be right by the church, which I totally support and get, and so that. I think that's really what it was, and it became that for me as well. Now, was it hard? Yeah, because, we had to go through and get an annulment. For me, she was married prior to, she had to get an annulment. And, sometimes when you go through that process, it's like picking the scab off a wound, and all the pain comes back up. And it was a very tough time. We wanted to do this, but at the same time, it was very tough.
How did you find it to be worth it to do that? So you said that it was really important to her to, I guess, be in right relationship with the church. What makes that part so worth it to go through a painful process as to go through 2 annulments to get that?
I think you want to be in right relationship with God so you can have the fullness of His grace, right? And that is what we felt like we needed to do to get the fullness of His grace and the fullness of what the church had to offer. And so if it takes a little bit of pain to get there, as hard as that was, it was worth it. And I think we'd both say we'd go through anything for that.
And I've heard people say that the annulment process can actually be very healing, and that you come out of it thinking like, wow, like that, now I kind of have a new perspective of why my previous marriage didn't work out, and a new perspective on what marriage is in general going forward.
It is surprisingly healing. In the middle of it, you don't see that. But once you get to the other side, and I can remember the night our marriage was being convalidated, I just felt this sense of relief that it's almost, for me, it was like the shame and guilt was gone. And so that was the healing that I needed. And, I don't want to speak for her, but I think based on what we've talked about, she would probably say the same thing.
And that's the point of the sacraments as well.
It is.
Is to take away our guilt and shame about it.
Yeah. For me, I felt like I was causing Robin pain that I didn't want to cause her. And I think she probably felt the same way. So that was, it's tough. And I'm so happy the church has really kind of made that process easier, so to speak. I mean, the pain's the pain. Ripping a Band-Aid off, it's always terrible. But, that part's always tough.
What would you say for advice to someone who needs to go through an annulment or is considering it? Because I know there's also the misconception that it's Catholic divorce.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who needs to go through that process?
Yeah, understand that it's really about there was something missing in the marriage that made that marriage a good intended marriage. And we're caught up in what the world says is good and bad. And let's face it, the world says what's good a lot of times is not good. And so we get caught up in that. And, we all make mistakes. You get married young, not really understanding what that means and what that entails. And, those things, you just enter into those marriages without the right intent. And without that right intent, there's no way that can be valid. And I guess my thing is, don't let that keep you from what you want most, and that's to receive the fullness of God's grace and His mercy. And we get those in the sacraments. And it's tough. I mean, going to reconciliation is still tough sometimes because you have to admit, I was wrong. And that's hard to do, to admit to another person. Even if it's your spouse and you've had an argument, that's a hard thing to admit. Look, I was wrong and I'm sorry. But that's exactly what we need so we can receive God's grace. And that's always worth it. No matter what temporal pain you feel, the grace is worth it. And don't shy away from that.
What did the annulment process look like? How does a marriage be determined null, that it was never really a marriage?
Yeah, I mean, I don't pretend to know all. I just know in my particular instance what the reasons were. Obviously, there are individuals trained in this, and they're the best ones to talk to number one, get the process started, but help you ensure that you're telling the story you need to tell to its fullest, so the tribunal understands what went on, whatever that may be. Like I said, I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs, because it's pretty exhaustive from what I understand. But those are the people that can really help them and talk through it. And they're going to ask probing questions, and they do it for a reason, and because they want to help you to get to where you say you want to be. But those questions can be tough.
I would say that process is probably one of the biggest reasons that people either don't enter the church or that they're afraid to come back. Because divorce is so common.
Yeah.
And even sadly among Catholics,
Yeah.
that they feel like, oh, well, I've separated myself from the church forever, and I can't go back.
Yeah.
But that's not always true.
Right. You can always come back. And I hope people do come back, and I hope they do what needs to be done to bring that right relationship back with the church and with God, because in the end, that's going to make them, again, be able to receive that fullness of grace, that's what their heart desires the most, and whatever that takes, it's worth it. And it's hard to convince people of that. And part of what I hope to do someday, God willing, I am a deacon, I can help them see that, because I've lived it. I've lived the annulment process. I've lived the conversion process. And I want to share my experiences now with them. So if one person says, hey, that's me too, if he can do it, I can do it, then that's what matters.
What do you think you would have done if the annulment couldn't be granted?
I'd have been deeply saddened, but I wouldn't have walked away from what I now know, because that's important to me. There was a time it's like, oh, I have to go to Mass. That's part of my commitment. I kind of had that philosophy as a Catholic. But now it's like, I want to go, to the point, if I can make work and daily Mass work out, I'm going to do that. I enjoy that. Even if I couldn't receive the Eucharist, I love the Mass and the beauty of it. And I want to be a part of that. And I want that to always be a part of my life. And so thankfully, I didn't have that to face, but I think we'd still be where we're at, because that's important to both of us. So much so that when we go on vacation, that's one of the things we look at. Where's the closest Catholic church? Because we're not going to miss Mass. Wherever we're at, we're not going to miss it.
And even make it a tourist spot if it's a pretty church.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of what we as a couple had decided is important to us, and it's always going to be important to us, and we're not going to deviate. That's a non-negotiable for both of us.
So would you say that, say someone is like, well, I'm pretty sure that my first marriage was valid in the eyes of the church, but we got divorced anyway, but I'm either married again or I want to get married again. I don't really want to submit myself to the annulment process and to the church, because I know I won't like the answer.
I don't know that anyone knows until you go through that process, right? I thought that. I was like, they're not going to approve this. You don't know until you go through the process, because sometimes those hard questions open up things that you've not really thought about or didn't want to think about that actually was at the core of what made that marriage invalid. You know, you don't ever want to believe that you entered into something like that and it was not valid. I mean, that's a hard thing to swallow. Again, having those conversations with those individuals that are trained in this and just going through the process is the only for sure thing that's going to let you know that, yeah, they'll grant something like that or they won't. And so I thought that. And a lot of prayer went into it. You know, those, please God, I'll do anything. But you got to be careful when you say that, because he might ask you to do something you're afraid of.
When my husband and I, when we were going through the process of converting, like, I was listening to the episode of the Catechism in a Year where they were talking about marriage, and I was like, wait, I think our marriage is invalid. And I just said it kind of like jokingly, but then I was like, maybe we like actually have to look into this, because he was baptized Catholic, but then when we got married, he wasn't identifying as Catholic, and so we got married in a Protestant setting, and it's like, wow, I think if we had gotten divorced during the first couple years of our marriage, that like it could have been annulled, like it could have just never been a thing. But I think since we have gone through the convalidation process, and even though we didn't have to go through an annulment, I think just going through that process of validating the marriage in the church and actually receiving the sacrament of matrimony, like having the actual mass and doing the whole thing, it was very beautiful. And I think that like our marriage now it's so much better than it was before. And like, it's not something that you can specifically put a finger on. But there's like a notable difference. And I think what it is putting your priorities straight. I think there's this false idea about marriage nowadays that like I come first,
Yeah.
or the spouse come first. So it's like it's all about me and what makes me happy. If I don't feel like serving you right now, then I don't have to. Or maybe it's not about me at all. It's all about the other person, whatever makes the other person happy. Maybe those two people find each other, but that's a dysfunctional relationship, because God is not at each of their like forefront, at each of their priorities. And putting God at the center of it really makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of the sacrament, right? Because now you can receive that full grace. You know, the beauty of the matrimony sacrament and God's love poured into that. And, you know, Robin and I can be talking about her professional career, but her professional career affects our marital life and vice versa. And so we kind of look at everything as a partnership. If it's good for our partnership, our marriage, then we're all for it. If it's not good for that, then we're not. And I think, you know, like you pointed out, prior I didn't look at it that way, because we can become very selfish people, and it's like, what's in it for me? And, you know, I think our age has a lot to do with it, because we've grown as individuals and as a couple together. And so we kind of approach everything that way in our life. It's about our married life first. And everything else kind of fits into that. So, yeah, I would love to see more marriage being taken more serious, because it is a serious thing. And that we kind of change that narrative, especially in this country, here in the South even. I mean, I feel like there's a lot more divorce here in the South than what I see other places. And maybe it's just my perception, but it does feel that way, doesn't it?
I think maybe in the North they're not getting married as much.
That could be true,
I think it's
yeah.
really what it is, because my husband's from the North and his friends are our age, and they're just now starting to think about marriage, even though they've been with their significant others for the same amount of time that we've been together. Yeah, that's definitely a common thing. But I think also for Catholics to take Catholic marriage more seriously, I've also seen a couple of people my age, and you said that you did this too, where you were bad Catholics and you got married maybe like at the courthouse or in a beach ceremony or take your pick, and then you validated the marriage inside the church, almost saying, yeah, I know I have to do that because the church wants me to, when that's really not the point of marriage at all.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, I guess, could you answer why the church takes marriage so seriously that some people would take their status of their marriage, whether they're divorced or need an annulment or whatever it is, and that be maybe a block to them joining the church? Why does the church take marriage so seriously that could be the case?
You know, I mean, we think about it. We hear about the bridegroom marrying the bride, Christ, in the church, right? And so Christ's love for the church is an example of what I think our marriages should be, right? To the point that it's easy for us to say, would I die for my wife? Yeah, absolutely. But there's such a deeper committed love that Christ offers to us as his church, and I think that's the example that the church is trying to show us. It's that deep, it's that serious, and the church wants us to view it that way. And, you know, unfortunately, we live in a time where that's not the case. But I always think, but if it were, how different would this world be? How much better might this world be if we did take it that serious? We were that committed to our married lives and our commitment to serving God together as a family. I mean, that's be phenomenal. I think of families within our own parish that I view them as very committed, loving couples, and I see the fruits of, you know, priests coming out of their families, nuns coming out of their families. That's a beautiful thing, and that's that kind of deep love, so much that I'm going to give my child back to the church to serve the church. And I think that only comes from that deep kind of committed marriage and love.
And like Jesus, he had a very strict teaching on marriage,
Mm-hmm.
that similar to the teaching on the Eucharist, where people said, this is a hard teaching.
Right.
When he said, no, you cannot get divorced, well, they were like, what? What am I supposed to do? Like, how could anyone get married then if they can't get a divorce? It's a very high call. And God has always compared his relationship with his people as a marriage,
Mm-hmm.
where when he was like jealous for Israel and called in the Old Testament several times when they would turn to idolatry, he would say that it was adultery.
Mm-hmm.
And because he and Christopher West, when he's part of the Theology of the Body Institute, he says, like, the summary of the whole Bible is God wants to marry us. And so that's why the church takes marriage so seriously. It's not we're just going to commit ourselves to each other for the rest of our lives. So why do we need the church to do that? Sure, we'll do that for my grandma.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get married in the church because I know I'm supposed to, but
Right.
I want to have the wedding that I want to have first. I don't want to get married in my church. I think that again has like the priorities out of whack and doesn't show, I guess that person just doesn't understand the depth
Right.
of God's love for them and what marriage means.
Yeah. I think there's a fairy tale that gets embedded into our psyche that says you have to have this big, elaborate, all this beautiful things around to make a good marriage. Those are just things, right? It doesn't, it's you and your significant other's commitment to God to be one and serve him. That's where the beauty's at. But our world tells us it's all these things around us, but it's not that. It's something internal to us all. And that's the cycle I think we have to break if we're ever going to fix this. And, you know, I hope in my lifetime I do see that, because I think I even in my own childhood growing up, I came from a broken home where my parents were divorced, and it creates a lot of difficulties in the family. It creates a lot of difficulties for the kids. It just makes things much more difficult. And all married couples go through tough times. I mean, some tougher than others. But the beauty is, on the other side, is the grace and the love you feel. Just like we talked about going through the annulment process. Was it painful in the middle of it? Yes, but the beauty in the love you feel on the other side makes it all worth it. And we just have to get to that other side. And most people are, I don't want to say most, there are people that are afraid to go through those tough times to find the beauty in it.
And the point of marriage is not to make you happy, it's to make each other saints.
True. And my wife has her work cut out for her on some days.
And so there's going to be iron sharpening iron. There's going to be trials. There's going to be moments where it's hard. But I guess if you're a Catholic and you've worked to this point of almost entering into marriage or even fully entering into marriage, then you've decided that this is who God wants me to be with as my partner to heaven and to become a saint. And even if maybe you didn't think that at the time that you got married, well, this is the person that you've chosen and you've entered into this bond with, and you can then make it into the person that is going to make you a saint, as long as you are putting God first and prioritizing that relationship.
Yeah, and I think I love what we do at the end of Mass. We pray for those discerning the married life. Sometimes I think deciding who to marry might be the easier part, but all the things that come with it, that's the hard part. That's where the real discernment is. Can I die to myself for our relationship, for our marriage? Can I lift the other up over myself? Can I do everything within my power to help this person get to heaven? Those, that real sacrificial love for the good of the other. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to grasp, myself included some days. But that's really, I think, what makes a beautiful, strong marriage is that.
And I've heard people say, what if I married the wrong person? And then they respond, you will.
Some days you will.
No, everyone will always marry the wrong person because you're never going to marry the right person. We had Sister Cecilia on. She was talking about how when she was discerning, maybe going to religious life, maybe getting married, she was thinking, okay, if I get married, I want my husband to be perfect. I want him to have all the virtues. I don't want him to smoke. I don't want him to drink. I don't want him to gamble. And she said that she felt one time during prayer that Mary said to her, you're asking too much. Only my son is perfect. So unless you're a nun and you marry Jesus, you're never going to marry the right person. And I think also sometimes marriage can seem like the default vocation, or maybe like the easy vocation, or like the pleasurable vocation, but it's probably one of the harder ones, if not the hardest one. I mean, of course, like becoming a priest, becoming a religious, like those are very difficult in their own way, but if we take marriage as seriously as the Bible tells us to, then it's actually very difficult.
Takes a lot of work. It is work, right? If you don't work at it, that divorce is going to happen. So yeah, it takes a lot of work. But any of those that are discerning that, I would say, if you're being called to the married life, that work is so well worth it. That you'll get way more out of it than what you ever put into it if you do it the right way.
So how did it feel being in a 100% Catholic marriage and in right relationship with the church after the convalidation?
I mean, it's awesome, but I will also say this, and I'm not going to take credit for it. I'm going to give it straight to Father Juan because he says it all the time, and he's right. He said, man, being Catholic's tough. It can be very hard sometimes, but it's so worth it because that's where the fullness of Christ is at. And so I think, as any normal human beings, you have your great highs and joys, and you still have your lows, and you still go through that. But you're in that committed marriage with someone that thinks and feels the same way you do, that no matter what's thrown at our way, together and with God, we're going to make it through it. And so to be able to take that fullness is just, it's hard to explain.
Did you guys have children together, or was it a blended family?
It's a blended family. There's 5 of them. I had 4, and she has 1. So it is a blended family, and they've blended nicely. And, they now, like I said, there's 12 grandkids and number 13 on the way, and they don't know it any other way. And kids always kind of joke and says, we got a weird branch in our tree, but it's our tree, and we love it.
How many of your kids are Catholic now?
Just the oldest daughter and her husband, and her 4 kids. They're the Catholics in the family, but none of the others are. My stepdaughter was, she grew up early in her life in Catholic schools, but I think that was kind of might have been a little rough point between her and her ex, and because he was not Catholic, and she's not Catholic today, and but we're praying they all come on over someday, and well, at least that's what we pray. But the real deal is, do they have a good relationship with God? No matter where they're at, that's what we want for them and their families.
Mm-hmm. So you are in the process of entering into the diaconate.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Correct.
How did that journey start? When did it start? And what has led you here today?
When I think back over how everything transpired, I think what really kind of caught me is some of that desperation and despair I was feeling again. And I was feeling it in my professional life. And I was like, I've got to change this. This is not right. And I was really struggling. And I remember Robin sitting here, and they were forming the class before us at the time. She said, hey, have you ever thought about the diaconate? I was like, you live with me. You know that's not who I am. But the crazy thing was, I actually had some thoughts about it, but I was terrified of it because of who I was in my past. And so I kind of really shut it down, and that despair got even worse in my professional life. And it was in 2019. I just was like, I was done. I couldn't do this anymore. And I remember talking to her, and I took the summer off. I quit my job, took the summer off to get my head straight, is kind of what I thought. And we were very fortunate that I could do that. And in that time, I spent a lot of time in prayer. It's like, God, what is going on? What do you need from me? And what I kept hearing is, I want you to serve me better. I'm like, I don't know what that means. And it wasn't clear to me what it means. Then I started getting terrified. Is it what she asked me? Because I was terrified of that. And what I decided is I can't figure this out on my own. And I'd been thinking about spiritual direction for a long while. And so I reached out to the guy that used to be our associate pastor, and he's no longer a priest, but I just reached out to him because he does spiritual direction. So I connected with him, and I started the spiritual direction. And as the more I got into spiritual direction, it started becoming clear that God was asking me to serve him, and that was obvious. I just didn't know what that meant. And so Robin and I have this theory in life that when a door opens, walk through it. When God doesn't want you to go any further, he won't allow you to open the door. So we decided, okay, we're going to pray about it. We're going to see what happens. That's the other thing she likes to say when you're really challenged by something. She's very good to say, well, have you prayed about it? Well, no. I think I'll go do that now. Of course, I haven't done that yet because I'm a thinker and I got to think about it first. So we started down that path, and the more I went down spiritual direction, it started becoming obvious, and she brought it up again. And I was like, oh, and this is the class formation that we're in now, and I was like, okay, we're going to walk through the door, and God will shut it when he's ready for us to stop. So we went through the process, we applied. I remember that first time we met, our little small discernment group over at Christ the King. I was absolutely terrified to walk in that ministries building. I was afraid of what I was going to learn when I walked in there. I mean, I was like panicked. Nice thing was, so were all the other guys and their wives that were in there. I think they were just panicked as I was. So it was kind of nice to see that. I was like, okay, I'm not in this alone. We're all terrified. So that's good. It's not just me. And our little group kind of grew together, and we started really opening up. And for me, that's a weird thing to do because I don't really know these people. And all of a sudden, I'm opening up to them like my life story, and they're doing the same. And it's like, this is strange. I've never done things like this with people I don't really know. And so we got through our discernment year, and I said, all right, you guys are going to apply for the diaconate. And Rob and I went home and talked about it. She said, well, you're going to do it, right? And I'm like, I guess. She said, what do you mean you guess? She says, you don't start something and quit it. That's not who you are. Has God told you no? And I was like, has he told you no? She said, no. I said, well, he's not told me no either, so I guess we're going to walk through that door. And so we did, and man, I can't even, people ask, what's it like? What have you experienced? The journey thus far, and we in our year of candidacy has really, it's deepened our relationship with Christ. And when I say we have a good marriage, we have a very good marriage. It's made our marriage even stronger as we've grown together as a couple, as Catholics in our faith together, and some of the couples that we're in this with, even our initial group that we were with, we're all still together in this process, and so we've grown so close to them, and to watch them go from I'm terrified to like I'm all in, just like we all are. It's a pretty amazing journey so far. And, God could obviously still say, hey, here's the end of the road for you. And I'm okay with that. Would there be a little bit that I would be disappointed? Yeah. But the journey so far has taught me what I think God wanted me to see is that, look, He doesn't want us because we're perfect. He wants us just as we are so He can build us up the way He wants us to serve Him in His church. And so that's the journey we're on, and we're very thankful for that journey and love it. Like I said, still got a few years to go, so we'll see how that goes.
What is the diaconate specifically?
So the permanent diaconate, it's, diaconia, the term itself means service, and so we're here to serve the church. That's what our deacons do. They serve the church. They assist. Obviously, we see it in the Mass. They assist the priest at the Mass, and so that's what we're about. We're about service to God, service to the church, service to the people around us, and that's really what it is.
Do you think that's why you kept hearing in prayer that God wanted you to serve Him better, and that He was using those words to guide you to the diaconate?
Now I do. Then I did not, because I didn't see myself. I just thought, okay, He wants me to spend more time in prayer. He wants me to spend more time studying His Word. That's what I thought. But He's kind of been showing me something different than what I thought.
How did you get started into spiritual direction?
I don't even know where I heard about it, other than I think what it was, I'd heard that this guy had left the priesthood and that what he was doing. I'm like, what is spiritual direction? I didn't even know what that was. And so I started reading about it, and I was like, ooh, that sounds like counseling. I don't know about that. But as I read more, I kind of really started to understand what it's all about. And it's like, yeah, that would probably be very beneficial for me. And it's, whatever it is, it's one of the most beautiful things about spiritual direction that I've come across is a couple of things. Where to see God in everyday life, whether it's in the trees, the flowers, whatever, God's there. You just got to slow down to see Him. Because we live in a world that's noisy and chaotic, and so we don't ever just get rid of noise and just exist with God in His creation. And so it's shown me how to do that, number one. And the other beautiful, challenging thing is when we talk about say, a scripture we read. He's very good about saying, who are you in that story? Where are you at? What are you doing? What do you smell? What do you see? So it's, very Ignatian in nature. So it's kind of cool to put yourself in the story and think about, how would you have reacted if you were there in the first century? What would you have done? Go back to the, John chapter 6. Would you have run off or would you have stayed? It's challenging to be a Christian in the first century. Could cost you your life. So, who would you be? What would you do? It's easy to sit here today and say that, but if you really take time and contemplate it and think through that process, it's kind of a really cool place to put yourself in and really connect deeper with God.
What is spiritual direction? When I've heard of it, I've seen it more kind of like having a person that is your spiritual director who is very knowledgeable in the faith, who can help you interpret maybe what you're feeling like you're hearing from God through prayer and in your life. But what you're explaining to me is you also do, I guess, those are kind of like homework assignments or something where it's like, hey, read this and meditate on it. How does it look practically?
So sometimes, we always start our sessions with, so what have you and God been up to lately? And so, leading up to it, I kind of reflect over the last month, kind of my experiences, something that stood out to me that has meaning, and we talk about it. It could be a difficult thing at work and how I may have responded to someone, and how that made me feel. And, kind of think through the process, okay, given the scenario, and now that I've had time to think about it, would have handled it different? Would have approached the situation in a different manner? What, those sort of things. So it's really just trying to slow down and pay attention to those little things, or even something as simple as the end of the night before you go into bed, just sitting and do an examen of conscience for the day. What do I give up to God as praise and glory for the things he put in my life today? Where did I fall short? Where did I cross that line and fall over into sin? And what led me to that point? So really drawing your attention to those sort of things. And sometimes what he'll do is he'll hear my story. And he says, well, there's a really great verse that if the Spirit leads you to reflect on that and just have a conversation with God about that and see where that takes you. And so, it gives you some challenging things like that to look at from a different perspective.
What are some signs that someone should start trying to look for someone to help them with spiritual direction?
If they have a heartbeat and they're breathing. I mean, honestly, I think everyone could benefit from it personally. I know I have. I know Robin has. I think it should be a part of who you are. It helps you grow in your faith. It helps you grow as a person. And I think it's been a blessing in our lives. So I think if you got a heartbeat and you're breathing, you should check it out. There's plenty of folks out there looking for people. So it's a beautiful thing.
How can you find a spiritual director? Is it like, because I've seen it or I've thought of it, like maybe like your parish priest, if they have time, they could help, or they might know someone who might be willing to.
Yeah, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the diocese does have a list of spiritual directors, but not all of them are Catholic in their faith belief, and that's okay. I think, I know Robin uses one that is not Catholic, but she understands Ignatian spirituality, and she understands relationship with Christ, and she understands, what we're going through as a couple in our faith journey and through our diaconal process. And so I think it's, someone that it's almost like having an accountability partner that is not your spouse, for example, because sometimes as spouses we can push each other off a little bit because of familiarity. Well, you may not do that with that accountability partner. So I joke with him. He is my accountability partner, but he's also my brother and now a good friend.
How is it different? Like you said earlier, you said, oh, that's counseling. How is it different than a therapist? Of course, there's like the spiritual aspect to it. It's not just psychology, but what is different about it in that kind of way?
I think the fact that it's very spiritual based, for me, is what makes it very different. I think it gives, it would be no different in a professional world that you had a mentor, right? To help you grow and develop in your profession. And this is just someone to help you grow and develop in your spiritual journey. And so I kind of liken them to that because they listen, they offer some feedback, they offer some guidance, and, you can share pretty much anything with them. I do with mine, for sure. And so I think that's the big difference. They become more of a friend than anything.
Is most spiritual direction, is it based on the teachings of St. Ignatius of Loyola?
I can't say that. I don't know. I know what draws me in is is the Ignatian spirituality that really speaks to me. I mean, I'm sure there are other schools that do different things. I don't know because that's what I'm exposed to, and I know that's what Robin's exposed to as well.
Mm-hmm. How has it impacted, besides discerning that you want to, are being led currently right now into the diaconate, how has it affected your process of potentially becoming a deacon one day?
We actually talk a lot about this, because we talk a lot about, trying to live who you foresee yourself being in the future. And so what's really important to me is just being authentic to who I am. It may not fit in a box that some people like to see, but I'm going to always be authentic to who I am. And I think that's what people are looking for. And so we spend a lot of time talking about that, whether that be service in the community. I'm going to be who I am, and they're going to see me the same wherever they see me. Not just, again, God willing, one day serving at the altar with the priest. They see me out in town, and I'm going to be that same person. And I think that's what really has been a focus, because I want to be authentic. I want to be real, just like an everyday person, because that's who I am. I'm an everyday person. And I think sometimes we get put in these boxes. People put on you that they think who you are, and that's not really who you are. My students do that to me as well in class. They think I'm this certain person, and then they see me outside of the classroom, and they're like, oh, he's just like a normal guy. And I'm like, yeah, pretty much am, always. So I think it really helps me focus on that.
Seeing your teacher and seeing your priest in public is usually a little jarring.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny. One of our granddaughters one day were with us, and we were driving there in Hillcrest, and we drove by Father Boscar, who used to be in town, but he was in just, didn't have any of his clerics on. He was just normal clothes. Hey, look, there's Father Boscar. And she's like, that's not Father Boscar. He didn't have his priest clothes on. And I'm like, they can wear other clothes too, right? I'm like, I've never seen it. So yeah, it's good to see them in there, out in the wild, so to speak, just being who they are.
And I think that's also impactful too, to see that clergy, priests, deacons, even teachers to a certain extent are real people, but specifically when it comes to clergy, that when they are dressed as a deacon, when they are dressed as a priest, and when they are in church, they are in persona Christi. They are in the person of Christ. They are acting as Christ in that moment, in a deeper way. So then when you see them outside of that and they're just a normal guy, it kind of speaks to the power, the transformative power that Jesus has, where mm-hmm. he can work through that. Mm-hmm. He can work through normal people to make extraordinary things happen.
Yeah, I mean, look at our own diocese. Look at our priests. We have this thing built up in our head that for you to be knowledgeable and be good at something, you have to be older. How many young, fantastic priests do we have in our diocese? I mean, they are crazy good. And I love to hear them give homilies, and I love to hang out with them. They're just good people. And yeah, it's good for people to see that. And these young priests are very good about letting us into their lives and see in their personal lives as well, so that we can actually see, yeah, you're just a normal guy.
And a deacon really is that bridge, because it is a holy order, like a priest. Of course, it's not all the way to a priest, but it is a holy order. You do become clergy, but at the same time, you're kind of a lay person. It's an in between. It's a bridge,
Yeah.
and so that's a really important role as well, to show that that lay people can become leaders in the church in that way. How would someone who is maybe thinking about the diaconate, how could they explore that more and, I guess, build that bridge between becoming, being just a layperson to potentially becoming clergy as a deacon? How do they, I guess, make that mental switch, especially since most deacons in the permanent diaconate, they already are married, they already have a family. It's not usually someone just starting out. If they are, then they usually go into the priesthood. How do they make that jump?
So I think first, foremost, start in prayer. Asking God, because I think sometimes, and I was one like this, am I confusing I need to do more service in the church, or am I really being called to serve the church? Meaning, could I get involved in committees or fundraising events to help serve the church, or is God calling me to this higher thing? And so I really struggle with that. So spend time, prayer. I would also say, have conversation with your parish priest and kind of help work through that. And again, spiritual directions where it really became evident to me that, okay, this is what I think he really is calling me to. As terrified as I am of it, I'm going to do it. Or at least I'm going to go down the process. And so I think that's where it starts. Because I think sometimes people might confuse, I need to do more serving the church and not really in that holy orders type of service, which is fine. We need all shapes and sizes to do many different things. And so really trying to discern that process out. I think here we do a good job like this. The class that's coming up behind us has already started they've already completed all their Q&A sessions across the state. They've already started getting applications, bringing people together to really start forming that next class of people. And so even talking to people that have been through the process, I talked to a few that had gone through the process that kind of helped me take that next step as well. But understand there is a commitment to it. Now, because we are married, the order of importance is God, family, and then the diaconate, and sometimes it's hard to keep that in line. So really understand what that means, and then understand what the commitment to the diaconate means. Because the journey so far, is it difficult? No. Is it time consuming? Meaning you got to study, you got to read, you've got some writings to do, you got to do the things to really develop and be really ready to commit to that. Because if you're not, then maybe it is you need to be doing other things for the church and involved in these other things. So you really not take that lightly.
And if a man's considering becoming a deacon, what stage in life is ideal for considering the permanent diaconate, where you're not going to become a priest, you're just going to be a deacon the rest of your life? Should he be married first? Should he have children first? Should he be an empty nester? What does that profile look like because of the balance of the demands of
Sure.
family and serving the church?
I think the church says you have to at least be 35 years old. I think that's the age range. Anything younger than that, I think they will not consider. If you're not married and you go through the diaconate, you're making a commitment to the church and to the bishop that you're going to remain celibate for the rest of your life if you're not married and you go through the complete it. If you are married and you go through it, and your wife passes before you're committed to that same celibacy. So you really need to understand that first and foremost. I personally can imagine doing this with young kids at home, but there are those in our class that have young kids at home. They have a large number of young kids at home. How they do it, I have no idea, because I could not. So I think that's an individual. I would say most of us are where I'm at, empty nesters and grandkids and things like that. But we do have some gentlemen, 2 or 3 gentlemen, that either haven't been married or their spouses have passed before them, and they're taking that vow of celibacy if they get to ordination day. And they're perfectly happy and have no problems with that. So you really kind of have to understand that first and foremost, because once you're a deacon and your wife passes, there's no more remarriage.
And I guess how does that look if, especially for the men where they still have young children at home, do they, on top of that, have a full-time job, or does becoming a deacon become their full-time job?
I would say most of us have full-time jobs, and we're going to continue to have full-time jobs unless we cross over into that retirement age. But yeah, most of us carry those full-time jobs. So this is just, again, God, family. And family, you can say your full-time employment, and then the diaconate comes after that. So you got to keep that order.
So after ordination, what does a typical schedule look like for a deacon? Would they, if they are trying to balance a full-time job and family matters with the fact that they are now a deacon, what are the demands? What a normal week, more than just a Sunday mass or maybe helping out with OCIA classes?
I'm not real sure. I mean, I can kind of guess based on what I see our deacons do. Like I know one is finishing a spiritual direction school, and so that's something he's going to add on top of his diaconal ministry, or as a offset of his diaconal ministry. I think that's kind of really up to between that deacon and the pastor of what that looks like. Typically you don't really, or I don't, when I go to daily mass, I don't typically see deacons participating in those masses, but that could be part of it, I guess. And I'm sure they all have some kind of ministry that they help or lead in some aspect. There are a few that I know that do lead some ministries within our parish. So, whatever that looks like and whatever your parish priest and you agree upon is what I imagine it to be, yeah.
So you said in that first meeting, everyone was terrified. What do you think was so scary about it? Is it the fact that this is a high calling to a new sacrament, a holy order, a big responsibility, or maybe could those just be, this is a good thing, and maybe like the devil was coming in and trying to make you scared of something that was going to end up being really good for you?
For me, I can say, and a few others have shared this with me too, that I'm not worthy enough to do this. I'm not good enough to do this. That was the thoughts in my head. As we've gone along, kind of what we talked about, the formation team has been very good about really helping us see this, is as you get closer to Christ and as you get closer to ordination day, you're going to come under more and more attack from things of the outside to distract you, because that's the one thing the devil doesn't want you to get that close to God. And the closer you get, the more attacks you're going to come under, and you need to be prepared for that, and you need to know how to defend those things. And it's so true. You can see almost in a daily journey sometimes where you're being led right up to that sin, whether it's someone says something to you and you want to respond, or you're driving down the freeway and someone cuts you off. Something as simple as that kind of opens the Pandora's box that allows the other things to kind of come flowing in. And so, you just have to be aware of that and be prepared for that. And that's where I think a good, strong prayer life, good, strong spiritual direction kind of helps prepare you for those scenarios. And recognize them before they happen or before you react. It causes you to slow down and really think about it. Where I, especially on the freeway, I want to react, and Robin's very good about, oh, you must need to be somewhere in a hurry. And I'm like, ooh.
They must be going to the hospital.
Yeah.
What daily practices have you implemented that have really helped you through this journey to the diaconate?
So one thing we commit to is praying the liturgy of the hours every morning and every evening. In the beginning, that felt very monotonous, and I was like, oh, I almost dreaded it. And so that we were encouraged, look, just stay committed to it, and you'll see the fruit of that. And so now we're 3 years into it, and it's like, that's part of my life. I'm not missing it. I love it. I enjoy it. I mean, some days I've read them so many times I can almost say it off the top of my head. So I love that because it's a very high form of prayer. I love spending time every morning just reading the daily readings and especially reflecting on the gospel and what it means to me. And then when I can go to daily mass, I love doing that. That's something that's become very important because sometimes I'll reflect on the gospel, think what it means to me, and I go to daily mass. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I was praying about this morning. Or sometimes it's something totally different and it's a new lens I hadn't thought of. And so it really kind of opens me up to see how God's word can say something to us one time and mean something to us totally different the next time. So those are some of the practices that we do that, like I said, was very monotonous in the beginning. It's really beautiful now, especially during Advent. I love it during Advent.
If yourself in high school could see where you are now in your spiritual life, if you could talk to him right now and tell him about where you are, how do you think that conversation would go?
Well, myself in high school was very hard-headed and closed-minded. That person would probably say, "You're doing what?" But I think what I would say to that person is, get to know God sooner, get closer to Him sooner. In some of those rough places in life, not say they wouldn't happen, but they might not have felt so rough. You might not have felt so isolated or detached from everything. That's probably the number one thing that I would say, because, as you get older and you get experience, hindsight's always 20/20. It's like you can see all the mistakes you made, where the path started going wrong. Try to help that person avoid those things. And, as parents, we try to do that with our kids. Sometimes they have to take that road and go on that journey to get to where they're supposed to be. So I don't regret any of that because I think that led me to where I am today and allowed me to be who I am today. I just wish that I'd gotten on that path much earlier in life.
Neal, thank you so much for sharing your heart with us today and sharing your story. We're so glad to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed sitting down with you and kind of getting to know you and just share a little bit about me as well.
We really appreciate your support with the podcast.
Absolutely. Well, I will continue to watch. May not want to watch this one. No, I'm kidding. I will. But yeah, absolutely. And I've been telling people, just last night I was telling some other folks about it. So
it is hard to listen to your voice back.
It is.
and I edit it, so I'm listening to my voice back all the time. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Planet Cross exists to bring you stories like this. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe, share with a friend, and head over to our website, planetcross.com, to find more life-changing stories.